animal! Skill their klovner!
Hello and welcome back, people. Decided to drop everything I was doing today because we finally have ourselves yet another update for Amazon's new world. Another round of alpha changes, but this time we've got quite a bit more to unpack here. So let's go ahead and get started. Kicks off with an introduction to what they've added. This one focuses more on the combat system with several changes we have to discuss, including a new weapon and shield type, tuning to core combat systems, and even a newly introduced dueling system. But speaking of the weapon, I cannot believe we're finally getting an official return of the Greataxe. Two different skill trees named both Marauder and the Reaper. I can't express how happy I am that we'll have a chance to use this weapon next year when the game releases. I was afraid it might have ended up being one of the last ones on the list, but now I've got a real decision to make when it comes to picking my loadout. For the first skill tree that's called Marauder, this one focuses on high damage and multi-hit abilities to slash your way through foes. I can imagine some good combo abilities coming with this one that you can pair with your basic and heavy attacks. The only offensive skill we've ever seen come from the Greataxe aside from the buff is the whirling spin, so this skill tree might just end up where it'll be. Depending on the skills available, the AoE capabilities of the Greataxe might be major. This could end up being a really good weapon to use alongside the fire staff for farming mobs in an area. Before now, aside from a few of the Warhammer skills, we didn't really have a good way to AoE enemies down on the melee side. But now we might just be able to hold our own or employ crowd control so our teammates can mop up the kills, which seems further supported by the next skill tree, the Reaper. Focuses on crowd control and escape prevention. These skills will help us control the flow of the battle while our allies dispatch those who have been caught in our grasp. The only skill I really hope to see come from this weapon to make it completely worth it would be a whirlwind. It could serve as a way to dodge out of a sticky situation if it staggers, and a way to add further to the AoE capabilities we talked about. And also, it would just look cool to have one. Now the Greataxe will have two crafted weapon perks that are specific to it in addition to the other perks that apply to other weapons. Most likely this will be one of those perks that increases the effectiveness of certain skills, but come to think of it, when we were introduced to the spear weapon, that one was able to make use of bleeds. The Greataxe also seems to be like the kind of weapon that would have that, so these perks might be related to that too. We'll also be getting a legendary Greataxe quest we can take after level 60, and just like the spear, I'm also guessing this will get added to the loot tables for corrupted breaches. Now the next part is a big one. For as long as I can remember, people have been asking for a dueling system, fighting each other outside the cities in solo matches or even pitching tents and setting up tournaments, all in the hopes that one day we would get the feature that lets us do this the right way. And today is the day that I'm really happy to read that the dueling system has officially been added to New World, but it goes much farther than just that. So of course we can now initiate duels after level 10 by typing out the command or using the social menu, but now we duel not only in 1v1s but in groups up to 5. That was completely unexpected, but I'm sure will be very appreciated by people who like PvP. This means you could set up tournaments, small skirmishes, test out builds easier. We can do a lot with this. Now hopefully they keep expanding this and add more features on the PvP side we can enjoy. The next portion brings up the new shield type. A couple weeks ago we talked about the upcoming weapons in New World that we've seen so far. The tower shield is one of the few that I mentioned that were basically rumors. I didn't know if it was actually real, or if it was going to be roped into one of the other shield categories or what, but it's actually a thing. Players can now use the biggest, most powerful shield in New World to date, and it looks pretty nice so far already. Maybe this means that the greatsword we saw might also become a thing in the future. This comes with some updated shield mechanics, like having them add to the armor stat in addition to block chance, and the total equipment weight. This probably means that between the round shields, kite shields, and tower shields, they'll each have different stats and weight that affect your character differently. If you want a more fast-paced warrior build, the round or kite shield might be the better option. And if you want a bulky tank build, the tower shield sounds like the one. Now I want to go ahead and skip past the core combat changes because that'll be another big topic we should end the discussion on. Instead, let's jump down to the changes to the abilities. First thing is that they've adjusted a number of abilities in order to give each one a primary focus. Some might be more focused towards sheer damage, applying a status effect or crowd control, damaging an enemy's grit, etc. Now with some of the core combat changes we'll be talking about, I have no idea if this means that some abilities will no longer stagger people or not, but that's something that could drastically change how the combat works if that's the case. Next thing is they've added some updated indicators to the backstab and critical hits to match the visual look for headshots, alongside a sound effect that happens when a critical hit goes off. Still on the fence about the critical hit system, but like I said before, we'll have to do some more testing to see how it really works. They also have some new visual effects to highlight when a character uses self-cast for target healing, or when you target another player. And there's new options in the gameplay settings to let you customize your healing experience, which I'm guessing would mean if you prefer the action combat version of healing, you can still use it, as opposed to the auto-target mechanics they've introduced for certain spells. It's important to keep in mind that this should not apply to everything. For the bow skills, they've decreased the overall damage by 15% on the spread shot, and increased the overall cooldown from 13 seconds to 22. For rapid shot, the cooldown has been increased from 15 seconds up to 20 seconds as well. For evasion shot, it's gone down from 20 seconds to 15, and for penetrating shot, from 20 seconds down to 18.2. New shield perks have also been added to the game, along with some minor UI changes like for NPC dialogue. For the progression, they've taken the leveling curve from levels 1 through 10 and adjusted it to better match the pace. Rested XP has also seen some changes where now it'll accumulate after 12 hours instead of 8, and increase by 2% per hour instead of 2.5. The last change has to do with the economy, where they have adjusted the items to pave the way for future crafting systems. It sounds like they're preparing to find ways to increase the effectiveness of the crafting system past what it already was. We've talked about before how in its previous state, it was easy to find replacements for crafted gear once you got to max level and started doing faction missions. The tier 5 gear came pre-socketed with gems and perks that helped a lot when farming mobs, and in some cases PvP. There definitely needs to be some improvements there, and I think both of these previous changes might be working towards that. Now what I really want to dive into is these combat changes. Some of these I'm really not sure about at the moment, but I'd like to go over them all the same. This is broken down in two parts, with the first being inside the full patch notes of this December update, but it goes hand in hand with the Q&A they also released to further explain the changes, so we'll switch back and forth as needed. First things first, they officially removed the interrupts on both light and heavy attacks. Now this is something that dials back to the ability changes they're making, where now they've been adjusted to each have a specific purpose. This reminds me of a combat system like Elder Scrolls Online, and to be honest, I'm not sure how well this could work. During the Reekwater event, we were able to test out a lot of the combat changes on the player versus environment side, and although it felt different due to the removal of shared cooldowns, these core combat changes sound like they will completely turn what we think we know about the combat system upside down. And without having a hands-on way to test it, it's impossible to know if it'll end up being a positive. In the Q&A, they say this change is related to the issues surrounding the stun lock, and as we know, the hatchet weapon was a very big abuser of this. But at least on paper, this sounds like it would nerf the hatchet straight into the ground. But let's keep going before we discuss it further. Light attacks now have chains to them, which essentially means they come with an ending attack that creates a slight pause before you can continue attacking. On first glance, this sounds like a method that would be used to slow down the combat drastically, but then I read the part where they adjusted the input buffers, which allows the players to start inputting their next action before the current action is complete. This is something I actually felt during the Reekwater preview, because before that you could very easily execute skills in between basic attacks through methods like animation cancel. Now they've shortened that window, so these changes could be a way to reward people that incorporate skill execution throughout their combos, and punish people that just try to spam. To me, it sounds like they're trying to work their way back towards the tactical side of combat we originally had, but do it in a way that lets us fully utilize our abilities and make it more fast-paced in the process. They've reduced the recovery time after using certain abilities. Players can now cancel out of dodges in basic plus heavy attacks sooner. You can now cancel out of attacks to begin blocking sooner, and remove the locked animation frames from blocking to allow for more free flow combat, which are all changes that seem to further support the idea of being able to use animation cancel. The question is, with the removal of attack stagger, will this allow players to feel more comfortable using basic and heavy attacks between skills? Or will we have the same potential problem where skill spam becomes a thing, at least on the PvP side? The ability change is what really has me curious, because if not all the abilities have crowd control anymore, we might not have to worry about it as much. On the Q&A side of things, they expand on this a bit further, with talking about things like how the weapon balance is still very important to them and is something they'll continue to work on, or how they're trying to find a way to ensure that AI encounters present a real challenge, but not be able to interrupt the player too frequently, because as they, and we all know too well, being CC spammed by certain enemies like the Dryads was pretty common. And that's part of the reason our abilities like Last Stand will now get a cooldown reset if they get interrupted in the middle of the animation. It's important to remember that these changes work in conjunction with what they've already talked about before, like how the elite enemies will also have new variations to them, so hopefully this will all make sense in the end. But let me know what you think about these changes so far and if it's for the better or the worse. I also recommend reading up on the Q&A to get a clearer picture on their reasoning for some of these changes. Thanks so much for joining me, have a wonderful night or day, and farewell.